Florence, Juliet, that was great. They're going to stick around. We're going to do questions and answers after the New Haven presentation. So before I bring Bruce up, a couple of logistical points and one point to take heed. Meriden, as you saw, got a good deal of help and was very proactive in getting grants. You may be sitting there thinking, well, are we going to get all that help? Are we going to get all those grants? Well, maybe not, but there is a lot of help out there. There are grants. There are Home Connecticut grants. There are Brownfield grants. CROG, South Central Council of Governments, CCRPA, Regional Plan Association, all have reports and resources, model zoning codes, plans for zoning your station area, complete streets, lots of people willing to help. So please don't think that you're out there adrift. There is a lot of capacity and knowledge in Meriden. You may think that your towns don't have all that. Well, you have a lot, you can do it, and there are also a lot of people willing to help you. Second point, the Meriden presentation, Bruce's presentation, New Haven presentation will be on our website. So you will be able to get them, you'll be able to show them to your zoning boards and your boards of selectmen and other people in town. So those resources will be available. Now I would like to introduce Bruce Hyde. Bruce is the Land Use Academy Director at the UCONN Center for Land Use Education and Research. He's going to talk about the idea of capturing value. You're wondering, well, what's that? Well, all the research shows that the fact that you have regular, dependable, affordable mass transit running through your communities is going to increase the value of property near there. That works for developers. While the cost of the property might be a little higher as a result, the potential return is going to be a lot higher. That's value that you can capture, and towns have done that. All of the research shows, and this is before we had $4 a gallon gasoline, values go up within a half a mile of the station. That's very important to keep in mind. That is a great resource for your communities. So I'll now turn it over to Bruce Hyde from UConn Clear, and he has a lot of research to go over with you quickly. Bruce.
Thank you, David. Excuse me. When I was on my way up here, I came up from New London, and I saw a sign. I was in Glastonbury, and the traffic slowed down. All of a sudden, I saw a sign that started blinking on and off. It said, delay 5 miles. And I was worried that I wouldn't get here in time. And I caught myself thinking, geez, if we only had commuter rail from New London to Hartford, I wouldn't be sitting in this traffic jam. And part of what all this is about, this TOD and the institution of commuter rail, is exactly that, to try and deal with the crowding on our highways. I guess since I'm between Meriden and New Haven speaking here, I'm sort of like the equivalent of the halftime entertainment. And since this isn't the Super Bowl, you're not getting Beyonce. You're getting the exciting world of value capture. And David saved me a little bit of time, because I know we're running a little bit behind schedule here, by explaining to you what value capture is. But in a nutshell, it's basically the government recapturing or recouping money, public investment, that they've made in things like transit or roads or extension of water and sewer lines, and using that captured value to further transit operations, investment in the area of transit, or whatever public purpose the municipality or governmental agency deems is appropriate to use that for. Again, the concept is that this increased value would not exist except for the infusion of taxpayer dollars and the investment of taxpayer dollars, and therefore, to be equitable, there should be some sort of return to the taxpayer to do that. Most often, the return to the taxpayer is then used to reinvest to create additional value in the area. It takes many forms. It's not just one small area of value capture. It can be anything from public-private partnerships to long-term leasing of public properties to tax increment financing to land value tax. And I'm going to concentrate on those last two areas. But before I do, I just want to say that DECD asked me to look into, as part of this project, to look into how tax increment financing could be used to promote the development of affordable housing in TOD areas. And after doing a lot of research about what other states have done and looking into the Connecticut statutes, I could cut this really short and basically say you can't. Because it is very, very difficult to use tax increment financing in Connecticut under the best of circumstances. And I'll go into the reasons for that shortly. Many of you are familiar with tax increment financing. It's been around for about 50 years. It's in 49 states, with Arizona being the sort of the lone holdout. And its basic form, I got that right. In its basic form, it looks like this. If you assume, let's take a piece of property that has a value of $100, and it pays $10 annually in taxes. That piece of property, lacking water and sewer lines, has a base value you can see there in the blue at the bottom. If a developer comes along and wants to build this great infrastructure, this great development that is green and is manufacturing wind turbines and can create 100 jobs and doing all these wonderful things, but the property lacks water and sewer lines, to which the developer requires. So the community can use the incremental increase in the value created when the development occurs to, let's say that's $5. Take that additional $5 over and above the $10, float some bonds, and use the bond revenue to put water and sewer lines to the property. That $5 is the incremental increase, which is where the name tax incremental financing comes from. So that's pretty much it in its basic form. It can take other variations. It's been used, as I said, in a number of different states. California was sort of the leader in doing tax increment financing. They generated about $6 billion a year in tax increment revenue. That went, and it was used to finance basically all their redevelopment activities. And that went away when Governor Brown took all that money and put it into plug California's budget deficit. Wisconsin has over 1,000 tax increment financing districts. They started off slow. They started in 1975. It started off very slow, and they made some modifications to increase more flexibility, which is why it's now so widely used. And they have 6 different areas in which tax increment financing can be used. It ranges everywhere from revitalization of blight to industrial development to one which I found intriguing, forestry, agriculture, and tourism. So housing, they have the housing uses tax financing increment from the financing of that order, and they do not have tax abatements. There is no provision in the state to allow for tax abatements. So basically, Maine's Affordable Housing Tax Increment Financing Program is a targeted tax abatement program where the increase in taxes is returned to the community, then they lend it back to the developers or give it back to the developers to be used for anything from infrastructure improvements to property acquisition to rent subsidies. It's not widely used in Connecticut, and there are a variety of reasons for that. Perhaps CDA, which is now part of Connecticut Innovations, uses it the most for their brownfields tax increment financing program. Without going into a lot of detail, I think they have about 15 or 20 so projects that they've done it. They work with communities to remediate brownfields using the increased tax from development that occurs once the brownfields are remediated. The reasons why tax increment financing is not used widely in Connecticut, I think I can boil them down fairly quickly here. It's expensive. Tax increment financing is the bonds that are issued are treated as revenue bonds. And because they're riskier than general obligation bonds, they carry a higher interest rate. It's also more cumbersome from the issuance of the bonds and dealing with bond counsel and going through all of that process. There was an article last week in HartfordBusiness.com where David Panagor, and I hope I pronounced that name right, the former COO of Hartford, talked about the attempts to use, and I think these slides are out of order, but I'm going to try it anyhow. Yep, they're out of order. try and do the cult gateway. That's the risk you run when you change your presentation the night before after you've given it to be put on permanently here. But in any case, they tried using tax increment financing to fund housing at the Colt Gateway project. According to the article, Mr. Panagora estimated that $325,000 in incremental increased revenue would be created by this particular project, but that the revenues under tax increment financing would only generate enough for a $1.6 million bond. That's under TIF. If they went to a general obligation bond, it would be $5.2 million. So you can see the difference that the tax increment financing is really not that attractive. Ensuring sufficient revenues is another reason why it's not used as much. Ensuring sufficient revenues to repay the bonds. In the 2012 legislative session, there was a bill introduced that would allow incremental increases in sales tax and income tax to be used to count toward the money to be able to repay the bonds. Needless to say, since that was money that was being siphoned off from the state and given to municipalities, it was not exactly greeted with open arms by the state, and it died in committee. In some communities, as in Merredin's case, developers insist on tax abatements as part of a financing or an incentive package to get them to do development in the area. Obviously, if there's a tax abatement, there's no incremental tax increase, so it can't be used in that. It's difficult to use in a down economy, particularly like the one that we've just gone through. No development, no incremental tax increase, and there's no ability to use it. So what has happened recently over the past several years is that communities have turned to special acts of the state legislature to allow them to create special taxing districts in a geographically defined area. These special taxing districts have the authority to issue bonds. They enter into an interlocal agreement with the municipality that shares the increased taxes generated by the development between the municipality and the special taxing district. The special taxing district also has the ability to issue a special levy in the area where of the special taxing district on its own, and in case there is insufficient revenue to pay off the bonds, which all means basically that the municipality is not on the hook for anything that happens if the project goes south. Therefore, the municipality's bond rating isn't affected, and there is no real impact on the municipality. It's been used in, we'll go back, Steel Point in Bridgeport, Harbor Point in Stamford, and it's not limited to large municipalities. Windsor has entered into a very aggressive modified tax increment financing program that is called the Great Pond District. Is anybody from Windsor here? Yes. Okay. It's my understanding that project is, yes, hi. That project is about to go forward, and infrastructure improvements are about to be made. So if you have any questions about how all of this works, I would encourage you to get in touch with them. There's a disconnect here. If you need to pass a special act of the legislature in order to make tax increment financing work, there needs to be changes to the legislation. There's variations that could occur here, such as pay as you go, where the amount, instead of issuing bonds, you collect the taxes and the incremental tax increase, and once you create a certain amount of money, you use that to put into improvements. I'd also be interested to hear of anybody else who has any ideas about how you think tax increment financing legislation in Connecticut can be changed to make it more effective. So with that said, I'm going to move on to land value tax. Land value tax is an alternative version of the property tax, which basically property tax right now in the state of Connecticut is weighed heavily with assessing the value of the improvements as opposed to the land. Land value tax switches that, and typically in a central business district, about 20% of the taxable of the tax burden is on the land, and about 80% is on the improvements. Land value tax switches that under the theory that, as I said before, that improvements were made, roads, streets, water lines, infrastructure, that sort of thing, is a public investment that has created value in private property, and therefore it is the value of the property that should be taxed higher. The Center for the Study of Economics, which is sort of the organization that has looked most heavily into this and is the biggest promoter of it, actually testified before the state legislature this year. They say that it's used in about 20 municipalities in Pennsylvania, and virtually all of Australia and New Zealand use land value tax. And to give you an idea, the proponents of land value tax say that it discourages, one of the problems that Meriden ran into, it discourages speculation and holding on to land, because obviously you need to raise some revenue if your taxes are higher in order to pay off the taxes. So I'm going to use two examples here that actually occurred in New London. In 2009, the state legislature passed a program establishing a pilot program, which, oddly enough, the parameters were so narrow that New London was the only community that qualified for it. And a committee got together and looked into that. And the proponents argue this, in particular in New London. If you look at buildings A and buildings B, you can see that the land area is almost exactly the same, 1/100th of an acre difference. The area, square foot of the improvements, property A is approximately 50% larger than property B, and the assessed value of the improvements is significantly different here. Now, property A is a well-maintained property that has retail business on the first floor, apartments on the second floor, and has been the subject of a large-scale investment by the developer who owns the property. Property B is owned by somebody from New York City who stores architectural antiques in it. It has been the subject of fire code violations, the subject of building code violations, and almost nothing has been done in the 15 years that this person has owned the building, other than to move architectural antiques into it and store them there. So the argument here was that if you reverse this and say the value of the property is on, the tax burden should fall on the land as opposed to the improvements, it's likely that the owner of property B, in order to generate some revenue to pay off that additional tax, will start to make some improvements. Again, it goes back to Meriden's problem with people just hanging on to the property and speculating. The second example is a vacant lot. This is a vacant lot that is in New London. You can see from the slide on the left that it is has views of the water. It is right along the railroad tracks. In fact, it is that property right there, right next to the Mambo Bar and Restaurant, and it is approximately 1,000 feet from a train station. Amtrak and Shoreline East both run out of that train station. That property has been vacant after the building that was on it burned down for 22 years, and it's changed hands several times. The taxes on that property are $3,000, and it's changing hands and not being developed because there's a lot of speculation going on about what's going to happen there. And it's easy enough to hold on to it until a time when things turn around and it becomes much more valuable. Those are the things that the proponents of land value tax point to as saying there's a good reason for it. Now, this committee that was formed in New London created a majority and a minority report after they looked into it. The majority report was we shouldn't go ahead with it. And one of the reasons they gave is that it was unfair. So you look at this area in New London, the intersection of Broad and Coleman Streets, Route 1 and Route 85, and it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 car dealers. Now you can imagine the impact that a land value tax would have on a car dealer. They really don't have the opportunity to improve the property and make it generate more revenue because it's used as storage of their product. It also fell by the wayside because it got too confusing. There were 5 different models that New London looked at to use for the institution of the land value tax. A 10% increase, phasing it in over a 10-year period, doing it all at once, split rate, and it just got so confusing that people threw up their hands and said, this isn't for us. Another point is that land value tax is revenue neutral, which means that it's revenue neutral for the municipality. There is no increase in land value in taxes in theory, if all else remains the same, that are generated for the municipality. However, because the property values shift, there are winners and losers with individual property tax payers. As it turns out that there were a majority of people on the committee that looked into land value tax that were losers, which is another reason why it went to the wayside. So both proponents and opponents have valid points, and it's something actually worth considering, I think, in looking at how it might be able to use to encourage investment in the area of transit-oriented development. And since we're running a little bit late, I'll leave it there.